Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us, and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. All right. So welcome to the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. And so as with each episode, I'm going to start with just lighting a candle. Inviting us in around that village bonfire. And within that, I'm just taking a moment to take a few deep breaths in and out. Letting ourselves just arrive in this space. And as part of that process of arriving in our bodies in this present moment, we also acknowledge the land that we are each on. The land I'm on as I record this, the land that our guest today, Ellis, is on. She's here with us. The land that each of you listening is on. Thanking it for holding us, for nourishing us, for teaching us, for evolving with us and through us. Acknowledging too, maybe the land of our ancestors, because many of us are not on land that is ancestrally ours. And then also acknowledging the people who were on the land that we are on before we were on it, and their ancestors. So that we really feel ourselves in a web of connection and aliveness, the past, the present, and the future. And so with that, I would love to, I'm so excited to have Ellis Elliott on today, a wonderful friend and someone I met through yoga down in Florida, my yoga family down in Florida, and someone who has just always really inspired me with her generosity and like how she just really courageously lives her heart and her values in the world and in her experience of life. So she's a writer, a dancer, and I've got through a lot of the COVID lockdown, pandemic lockdown, by being a part of her Bewilderness Writing group, which is really amazing. And we'll probably have some time to talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, it's a really beautiful process of getting in touch with our creativity. So that's a lot of what I think our conversation today is going to sort of revolve around, is creativity. So her bio: Ellis Elliott is a writer, teacher of ballet, and facilitator of online free writing groups called Bewilderness Writing. She has a blended family of 6 grown sons and lives in Juno Beach, Florida. She has an MFA from Queen's University, is a contributing writer for the Southern Review of Books, and is a section editor for the Dewdrop Contemplative Journal. So welcome, Ellis. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it is such an honor, Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm anticipating starting a lot of episodes with is kind of this question. In a lot of cultures around the world, traditionally people introduce themselves with their lineage, their family names, right? And other markers to kind of help people meeting them like come to know where and how they fit into social fabric of things.
Mm.
So I sort of want to give you an opportunity beyond your bio. What are sort of any identities or roles or locations that you want to share with people that would orient you in the larger world? Or maybe do you know where your ancestors are from and any lineage things?
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yes. So I grew up primarily in the Ozarks of Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, but my parents and every summer of my life growing up were in the mountains of East Tennessee and on my father's tobacco farm in Northwest North Carolina. And the land that my brother and I currently possess. That's not a good word, but we do. We own or are caretakers of the land in North Carolina where the farm is. And as my father put it, we've had this land since the Pilgrims, the our particular family. But in fact, the land is not ours from the Pilgrims. It was many different tribes of Indians that, as my brother forced me to walk along those tobacco fields in the summer when I would visit, he would be looking for arrowheads. And that began his lifelong love of all things archaeology and
Mm.
history. And all it caused me to do was complain a lot. But that made that connection for me early on, that these arrowheads come from something way beyond the Pilgrims or whatever our family name that goes back, to the Revolution.
Mm.
There's something much deeper, much more profound than that in that
Mm.
particular land. And then the mountains of East Tennessee for my mother, and I feel very connected to those just from spending summers there, and that different way of life. Such a contrast between even two generations back from me today.
Mm.
That kind of in the mountains, Appalachia, that was especially back 100 years ago, 150 years ago, that they were very isolated and uneducated, and they
Mm.
really had to create a culture of their own and
Mm.
survive on their own. So I guess that yeah, I jumped right in with both feet with that, but that is, I feel connected through my parents to that land, and as well as in my childhood to Arkansas.
Mm. I love that. And, it's funny. I originally thought we'd sort of start with a question of creativity, but I think we might circle back to that and kind of follow this
Okay.
thread that you just kind of opened up here. Cause I love, what's kind of coming to me that I'm finding myself just naturally curious with. I mean, I felt like I could really feel the presence of those places in your words as you were speaking, and so I'd love to hear how those places or how that informs your writing and your dance, how that actually has kind of, because those have been some of the main ways that I think, or maybe where did your love for dance and writing start? And if so, how was that connected with sort of these places that really formed you and shaped you?
Oh goodness, that's a great question. I think um, the my love of all things movement, whether it's dance or yoga or um, any kind of movement study, uh, comes from my perceived lack of or inability to express myself verbally.
Mm.
So I found great solace in movement
Mm.
where I basically felt I was alone together with other
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
It was safe in there to express
Mhm.
myself that way. And then that also translated at the same time and later with words on the page.
Mm.
as far as expressing myself in the only way I could
Mm.
at the time. And of course, that changes with us as we age. Now, how that connects to the places I come from, I'm I'm trying to make a thread here. Certainly, um, the that my grandparents weren't dancers. Yeah, needless to say, they were very busy just trying to make a living. So there
Yeah.
was not the extraneous ballet classes given to them, but and also my father, I think, would be the one that I would connect with the most, who told his father when my grandfather told him that a certain way to grow the tobacco and pick it, and he was instructing him. And I think my dad was like 8 years old, and dad said, I have no intention of making a living doing this.
Mm.
And my father subsequently created whole worlds in his little uh, drawing pad and wrote of a
Mm.
whole different family. So
Mm.
we all have our ways of escaping our given moment in front of us. For
Mm.
mine, reality, and then that connects to the creativity question that you
Yeah.
began with. For me, I think
Yeah.
it's my way of befriending reality as I
Mm.
perceive it. But
Mm.
I think I've wandered way around from where you
Yes.
started, and
That's okay. I love it. I'm totally following it. Yeah. It's yeah, I mean, I love that piece that you just shared about, creativity being able to use to escape and also being able to, befriend reality, right? And yeah, that somehow I feel like it exists at this liminal space kind of between where we are and like where we want to be, and it can help us kind of bridge that gap in a lot of ways is sort of what I'm hearing from what you're sharing. And you know I think that's such a beautiful definition, because I think a lot of times in our society there's a lot of conversation around creativity that it's almost like it's either something you have or something you don't have. There's sort of this implication that creativity is like this genius that strikes some people and not others. And it's so, like, I find that so limiting. And for me, in my sort of understanding of it, like creativity feels like actually an energy, that it's actually potential energy or life force energy that we tap into. And I was sort of even saying, when I was thinking about this like last night, tap into when we're at the edge of what we know, or when we're creating something new. And so, I mean, I think that ties beautifully back to what you were just saying about sort of for your dad with his drawing. It was like a way of sort of creating a whole new family and imagining a whole new world for himself.
right,
And for you, it's kind of, yeah, this almost, and I'm familiar a little bit with some of your writing. So I know some of it is also historical, actually, and kind of bringing you back to also helping you befriend what was, and
right,
sort of in ways that, like, maybe when we escape family or we escape our reality, there's also still a loss there, right? Or like almost a severing of roots sometimes that I see in myself and I see with clients. And um I mean, this feels like a really beautiful moment actually to kind of read your poem Strike. Would that feel
sure,
good to you right
yeah,
now? Just because that
yeah.
sort of feels like a little bit like what we're talking about.
Yeah, we jumped back into North Carolina, yeah, or into my childhood as well. Yes. Okay. So this poem is called Strike. Some stories fill the house of your body like smoke, the smell of cigarette rising up the carpeted stairs from the kitchen, ice crackling from plastic tray to glass. Regular as ballet class and homework, I waited in my room for her steps up to bed, my shallow breath, background sound for dread. In the flicker of half sleep, I was sure her heavy lids, unsteady fingers would go slack, the lit tip fall again. This time, sure, it would not stop at scorched carpet or sheets with buttonhole burns. Sure, I would feel the blurred heat first. Some stories live in your bones like fire on a North Carolina winter night. My father's tale of the thunderstorm that hit the farm after Christmas, how he played with his toy train on the oval terrain of the brown and gold braided rug by the hearth, how lightning struck and sparks circled the track, surrounding him before disappearing, how he froze, unable to speak, how 70 years later he could feel the hot current run under the thin flesh of his hand. Some stories slide thick from behind to settle like black tar down my fully grown spine. How they no longer ignite with bending or excess heat, but stagnant and unwilling to go, resigned to the staying.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to give a moment to just let that kind of ripple. Hmm. Yeah. And then, I mean, I find so much about that so moving, just,
Well, thank you.
yeah, just really how it sort of situates, like for me as a reader, as a listener, how it sort of situates me in this moment in your childhood, but then also how that kind of ties back and sort of it brings in some of your mother's story and your father's story, and it reminds me how we are really like products of sort of these woven threads of our family lines, and how stories can sort of help us track those threads, and how those threads can either sort of feel like they're holding us back, or and how do we start to process like through or work through some of those spaces where it might feel like those threads are burdens more than gifts.
Yes, yes.
um yeah, so I mean, I would love for you to share, I mean, if anything kind of comes for you with what I just said, or if you want to share anything more about sort of the writing of that piece, or yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the story thing, I do think that we are our stories, and whether for good or bad, neither. And they do fill our bodies. And I think that's
Mm,
why, I've sought movement and writing, because they do live in your body, whether it's a great, exciting, fabulous story of the joy of living, or it's a trauma. And in order to express that, the writing, whether your art is cooking or writing or singing or visual art or whatever, it's getting it, for me, dance class was getting it out of my body and
mm,
through. I always think
mm,
of it out and through. Um,
mhm,
these are my stories. I've got to get them up, out, and through, and onto the page, and or onto the canvas. Or for me, I do odd other things with cut and paste or whatever ways to express yourself, whatever it is.
yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, the stories in the body is a very tactile, true part of who I am and how I
Yeah.
express myself. They're one and the same. And
Mhm,
for me, yeah. So, and it all, like you said, goes with that. We are our parents and our
mhm,
grandparents and our best friends from seventh grade, junior high, math
mm,
class, or whatever.
mhm,
We are that combination. Um, and all those stories add up to the life
mm,
that we live and how we express ourselves and what we want to express.
mm, mm. Yeah, I love that. and as you were speaking too, it sort of reminded me of another thread that I feel like we kind of started to tease out a little bit earlier in our conversation, which was sort of in spaces and in cultures where people are very much in survival mode, how we still need art, right? And I think a lot of
Yes.
times, again, not only does our society often think creativity is something that you're either born with or not, which is like a false, a false assumption or a misunderstanding, but, also the idea of that art is like, when we kind of look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I think a lot of in modern times, we're sort of debunking some of that because, he really focuses on that we need food, we need shelter, we need like, those really basic physical body survival needs. And while he's not wrong, without those, like we, we don't
Yeah.
exist. That's a problem. And often I think when we're really in survival mode, we struggle to tap into our creativity, or we struggle to tap into more of that spirituality, because it's like we've had to narrow that like the blinder gaze so much when we're really like head down, grinding survival mode, but we cut ourselves off from something that we actually still really deeply need to survive. And so, yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from you. What do how do you see art or creativity or expression or spirituality, even? Because I know some of your work, is also really about sort of finding that sacred in the daily, that sacred in the mundane. How do you view all of that as kind of, particularly where we started this conversation was sort of, yeah, your dad with his drawing pad and sort of this very like subsistence survival living, kind of culture and space. And then you saying, your grandparents never danced, so you're not really sure where like the passion for dance came from. But, yeah. So I guess where does that thread kind of go? Where do we,
Yeah.
for
Well,
you?
I could not agree more with you that the creativity is not limited to the talented or gifted, or it is inside all of us, and we express it. I mean, in a thousand different ways. And I do think, if I look back historically, even in my own family, or that survival mode, yes, and maybe they didn't dance, but they canned green beans and they made a quilt and they, braided tobacco leaves. I mean, that you did whatever was in front of you, and they picked up a mandolin, or they, you know, beat a stick on a bucket. There are ways that we make our art no matter what. So
Mhm.
there, it was a way to a departure, an escape, like we say, and that certainly existed every bit
Mhm.
as much back then. As the more things change, the more they stay the same. Today, our our obstacle is our attention.
Mhm.
That we are constantly pulled in a thousand different
Mhm.
social media, internet directions, email, and and the other part of that, not only are we distracted, but also creativity became something that was a means to an end. Are we going to, you have to start this and you're going to produce what? It's got to be productive. We've got to make it mean something, which it is meaning making,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean necessarily that it needs to go in a gallery, or it needs to be
Mhm.
sold, or it is for personal gratification and
Mhm.
fulfillment. And I think we lose that so much. And we put way too many um, um, pressure, too much pressure on ourselves. I know I do, to make it perfect, or make it look like the Instagram person in today's world, when in fact, if we just cut through all of that, we can maybe find our way back to listening to the world and opening ourselves up and putting that person
Mhm.
out on the page, or however we're going to express ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I was just speaking with a friend the other day who, has a deep passion for restorative justice work and was at a restorative justice conference. And she was telling me, that's the first time she went to sat in on a talk there and a workshop about sort of art and creativity within the restorative justice,
Mm.
sphere. And and why it's important for people living deep within systems of oppression to still have access to arts, to still have access to, creative spaces. And she told me, I mean, she has, I'm hoping to get her on the podcast at some point. And she has a really powerful story of, just has been through just incredible challenges in her life. And, um, yeah, but so she was talking about how that was the first time anybody had really framed up for her why art should matter to her. And she was saying how it was such a powerful realization for her because art lets us, practicing art, the practice of art, the devotion or discipline of art, right, taps us into creativity, which, you're right, it can dream us other worlds. I mean, what you were talking, and it can step us out of sort of this internalized capitalism of like, in order to do something, we have to do it to create a product, right? And so by stepping us out of that space internally and tapping us into something where possibility, there's more possibility for new creation, we can't actually create any kind of revolution without art and without creativity and without the practice of that, because that's such a key piece to keep us in spaces where we keep kind of questioning the reality that we're in and processing the pain of the reality we're in and being honest about the pain of the reality we're in and dreaming about something else and something new and something fresh, and something different. And um, yeah. So what you just shared was kind of reminding me of that. And, I'm aware that you teach dance at Faith's Place, right? Is that?
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
yeah. And so, yeah, would you want to share it all about kind of what they're about and what that's been like for you, or what, why that is a passion of yours?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I'd love to share about Faith Place Center for Arts and Education in West Palm Beach, Florida, and directed by Noble Lockhart Mays. There's my full on plug. Um, is an amazing, for lack of 47 different adjectives that I could use to give the accolades I would like to give to this particular program, which takes all of the kids there, African American kids that more or less come from underserved communities around the area, and gives them an otherwise perhaps they never would have access to a strings program, a vocal program, a huge percussion program, dance program. We do writing, and the emphasis on elevating and celebrating and teaching these children that they deserve everything the world has to offer on an equal
Mm.
footing, and then placing an emphasis on education is what Miss Mays does. I just recently attended their banquet for college for their high school graduates going to college. One young woman had an unimaginable background of basic. She and her sister, and I've been with these girls, this will be my 5th year, but she and her sister, in the time I've known them, her younger sister, they basically didn't have either parent available, so they were being raised by grandmother. During COVID, grandmother hit her head in the bathtub and died. Then they were sent to an uncle. Then they were sent somewhere else, ended up with a family that's a part of the Faith's Place family. And this young woman was up on the podium finishing high school and already accepted and headed to college. And
Mm.
that's what they do there. They not only
Mm.
give them these unlimited opportunities in the arts, but they also give them so many other life skills
Mm.
that that will carry them forever. And it's very much a passion of mine, just to, as you can tell, just to promote what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I love that. And yeah, I mean, it seems like, yeah, it seems like just a powerful example of, yeah, sort of bringing arts into these restorative justice spaces, because it, yeah, helps with life skills, like you were saying, with being able to imagine, that we're worthy when we're constantly receiving perhaps um, feedback from our environment or the society around us that maybe we're not as worthy as others.
Yes.
Um, so, and that actually sort of also feels like then it kind of segues a little bit into maybe your next poem that you wanted to share
Oh,
today, Come
okay.
Lay Your Hands, just because I think, yeah, I mean, and if you want to kind of give any, I don't know if you want to share any context before you read it or if you want to share it after, but, I know you write a lot about Julian.
Right.
Um, mhm.
Yes. Yes. Let me I think I'll read it first. It has an epigraph at the beginning that kind of gives you context. So
Perfect.
we'll just go, if
Sounds
that's
good.
okay.
Yeah.
Come lay your hands. Begins with the quote, Jesus changes everything. Joyce Meyer, televangelist. Except Julian's diaper. Tim, father of 17-year-old Julian, who cannot walk, talk, or feed himself. O come lay your hands upon him, speak in tongues and song and ancient words, bring your creeds, your rituals, your holy smoke and incense, raise him high, kneel down low, rock him in your arms, bow at his feet, baptize him in water, anoint him in oil, lift him up, sit him in a sweat lodge, print his name on the list, circle up, and phone tree him with prayer. Let that prayer grow loud and enormous, a monster to envelop everything in its path. Place pins in him that correspond with systems, both spiritual and physical. Join your words, your thoughts, your prayers into a groundswell of unity. Email this list to your 7 best friends. Don't walk under a ladder or look in a cracked mirror, but do pick up a penny. Pick the number 7. Read from your books, scriptures, and verses. Chant and ring bells. Give it your best shot. Oh, harness your codified swirled circles of energy that pop across eternity, cacophonous and unwieldy as Godzilla in downtown New York City. Let them rain down in snowflakes upon his face, blanket him in paper confetti of prayers and tears turned whispers in his ear. Be sure no one is looking when you tell him the truth. You are powerless and cannot change him. He has changed you.
Yeah. So just giving that one a moment to kind of settle and ripple. Mm. Yeah. So yeah, anything you would like to follow that up with? Mm.
Thanks for asking. Nobody ever asked. It's so fun to talk about the poem's background. Um, this was a poem I wrote not long after I remarried, and my husband is a widow with 3 sons, and one of whom is Julian. And I had a, a super high learning curve into the special needs world when we first got married. And Julian at the time was 12. He's 25 now. And he is an extraordinary human being. And when we were talking earlier about some of the subject matter of sort of the umbrellas for what the conversations would run like here, one of them is what it means to be human. And Julian makes us, and he does make us question that
Mm.
all the time,
Mm.
being around him. This human being who is unable to speak, who cannot walk, whose physical presence is disfigured in ways. And so this poem spoke to so many of the things that my husband had been used to for 12 years from the get go. And his wife, who passed away, they uh, were used to the things that were new to me, like the way people looked at Julian, or did not, or could not look at Julian, or the ways they spoke to him. And then what surprised me the most was the number of folks that felt the need to tell us what we should be doing with him.
Mm.
You know, you are, let me tell you, I'm going to apply this or that to fix him.
Mm.
And that struck me, and I couldn't stop thinking about, you know, what is Julian but a mirror for who we are? You're not going to communicate with him.
Mm.
There is not that he does not communicate. There's no facial expression. So it's really about you and your
Mm.
interaction mirrored back to you with him. And so when people are talking, folks very kindly are trying to give us ways to fix him or make him different, or this is the therapy you need, or I'm going to put him when um, when you live this life day in day out, it becomes a whole practice of acceptance,
Mm.
of accepting him as he is, and then by that very acceptance, then opening yourself to the gifts that he can give you
Mm.
that have nothing to do with getting him up and walking him or teaching him how to speak or anything like that. So that's where that came from, and that's certainly true for me. He has
Mm.
completely changed my life.
Mm. 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 Yeah, my dad is legally blind, and so while he can certainly, as his, well, at this point his eyesight is pretty much entirely gone, but as he doesn't challenge our notions of what it is to be human or to be a functioning human at the same level that Julian does. And I'm very aware, how many people really don't understand what blindness is. um and um and just how I not too long ago, well, it's been a little while now, but when would that be? Like 5 years ago now, I think 6 years ago, found out that I also have the same degenerative genetic eye disease that he does. And while it hasn't yet started, it isn't yet affecting me, in ways that have asked me to change my lifestyle, and we don't know what kind of time frame that has on it. It's very much like, well, you have this and it might affect you and it might not, and it might take a little while and it might not, and so a lot of uncertainty there. But I've been really listening into, and I think this kind of ties back into sort of the conversation around restorative justice, right? Whether it's restorative justice for racial inequity, whether it's restorative justice for physical, like different ability, and, whether it's physical, mental, whatever, sort of these different abilities, special needs populations or other disabled populations in different ways, or differently abled populations, as I think sometimes some people prefer to call them.
Oh yeah,
Lots of
words.
different words. Yeah, but it is because, it's the people who our overculture kind of pushes, and our current internalized notions of what it is to be human, and what it is to be productive, and what it is to be alive, and what it is to be a contribution to the world, right? The people who, for whatever reason, challenge our notions of that, queerness as a gender identity or a sexual identity, right? Like all of that stuff, the people at the margins are often the people who are kind of the prophets and the oracles and the seers in a lot of ways, or make us confront those things within ourselves, because they sort of challenge our notions of what's comfortable and of what's quote unquote normal, right? Neurodivergency, right? So people with ADHD, people on the autism spectrum, right? Like all of that stuff. And yeah, and so it's such a powerful way. And I mean, I think, I love that what you just shared about Julian kind of being a mirror in many ways for people, because he doesn't speak or give facial, responses, communicate in ways that we would traditionally consider, communication to come in. And so, yeah, how easy it is for people to kind of project their own stuff, their own assumptions and understandings and biases and comfort levels, onto him. Perfectionism, all of that, right? And I find it so beautiful that so many of your poems are sort of about what he's awoken in you, and how in some ways that sort of helps create meaning, it in some ways helps be part of the meaning that he brings to this life then, and helps define almost like what his purpose and his meaning is, that I think a lot of times we like to think that we know our purpose, right? Or we should figure out our purpose and then we should live our purpose in the world. And we think of it as like this individual thing that we like have to figure out and steward and then share. And, part of what I'm hearing anyway, one of the ways in what you're sharing is sort of challenging me, is like recognizing, our purpose is co-defined, right? It's like defined by us, but it's also defined by the people who interact with us, and by what we awaken in them, and by what they take from us, or how they're changed by us. And that it's through our relationships with other people, that meaning and connection and identity are actually created and formed. And how beautiful it is that, for Julian, who doesn't speak, you're like writing for him, in some ways. I mean, you're not writing for him. He has his own voice in his own way, but somehow some aspect of him is amplified through your own like creative process.
Yeah.
It feels like,
I
yeah.
hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, I would love to, I'm, aware of our time, so kind of starting to land the plane a little bit here. And I would love to offer you kind of two opportunities. One, to kind of speak to any writers, creators who are listening with, and share anything about any tips or recommendations, or, things you want to share about kind of, I've sort of shifted away from using the word discipline to using the word devotion, because discipline often feels almost too rigid to me, and devotion feels more like a regular practice, a rigor that I'm choosing into, right?
Yes, I like that.
But yeah, so the devotion of writing, or the devotion of dance, or the devotion of creating in some way. Yeah. So do you have any kind of tips for that, or when you get stuck in that process, or how you kind of keep going with that process? Because I know it can feel like a really sometimes thankless and really challenging process.
Totally, totally, yes. And if there is a block, I have experienced it, whether it's self-sabotage, perfectionism, all of those things that we put in front of ourselves to make it needlessly difficult. And
Mm,
it's not to diminish. I mean, certainly we have dry spells, but I think it's relaxing that expectation and being okay with, okay, maybe I'm not going to finish the great American novel in the next 2 weeks. Maybe I'm going to write 3 sentences. And that's okay, breaking
mm,
it down into bite sized bits. And of course, through my bewilderness writing, I'm going to throw
yeah.
that in there too.
I
I
was feeling
feel
that thread coming. Yeah.
there's a lot to be said for, and I don't even necessarily, I just stream of consciousness. However, you don't, and like you had mentioned, I don't call it a discipline like 3 pages every day. No, 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 no. You just let it flow when it flows, whatever it is, writing or any way of expressing yourself. And for me, it is writing, and the way I tap in is through other doors and windows. Besides, I've got to sit down here and I've got to come up with an idea for a poem. And let me, look at my list 1, 2, 3. It's just not that logical and linear ever. And the way I can tap and get under that top level is by doing that stream of consciousness, which is what we do in Bewilderness with some poetry prompts, lines, and you can use the lines or not. And go wherever the idea takes you. And that's where I find the good stuff is. If I can just keep my pen on the page, and it doesn't have to be, it can be for 3 minutes or 30, whatever, that's where I find the really juicy, fertile stuff. And doesn't happen every time. It might just be 1 out of 10, but that one is great. And to give yourself credit, we just don't do that
Mm,
either.
mm,
To celebrate our own. I wrote 3 sentences today. Yes, great. And they were 3 really good sentences. If you're a poet, it's 3 lines, and I really like them. I'm trying not to change them, 500 more times.
yeah.
So that's, I guess, the creative process for me, I have learned with lots of failures and lots of experience of all of these roadblocks that get in our way, that are just allowing and
Yeah.
accepting and playing. That's what the
Mm,
subconscious allows us to do, is let it be play. And
mm,
we tend not to want to. That's frivolous, that's a
mhm,
luxury. Well, no,
mhm.
no, it's not. That's where the good stuff is.
Yes, I love that. And even it's funny, this actually, when you were just sharing about bewilderness again, it sort of linked me back to even what we were just saying about sort of your poem about Julian and the mirror and kind of that idea that I was sort of that came to me with that of kind of, yeah, how we don't create in a vacuum, right? Creation, just like purpose, I think is sometimes something we imagine needs to be new and revolutionary and revelatory and like some big epiphany and we're
Right.
supposed to like sit in quiet by ourselves until we come up with like the fresh idea that no one's ever had before, and it's like, whether we're in business, I mean, that's something I come up against, right, in the work that I do. And being an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, right, I look out of the world, there are lots of people doing the kinds of stuff I do, and none
Yeah.
of them are doing it exactly like I'm doing it. So my voice is still worth it, but it's finding those. Yeah, it's very easy to kind of, there are no totally new ideas, right? Like there are and there aren't. And so I think, yeah, with bewilderness, I mean, it's the same thing. We're using some other form of creative expression maybe, or some other stimulus to help us actually tap into our creativity, and it becomes this co-creation actually in many ways. rather than, again, like you were saying, yeah, that vacuum of just like, okay, I got to sit down and I got to come up with an idea and I got to write it, which like that has never worked for me,
Yeah. Uh-uh.
um, I even, while I was doing Bewilderness with you, I sort of discovered sometimes I would be trying to write copy, business copy for my website or whatever, and I would be feeling just really stuck. And I would actually put on a song and I would dance to the song so that I'd be moving my body, moving some of that stuck energy through. And then I'd pick one lyric from the song that jumped out at me. And then I would actually Bewilderness write about that, like one phrase or the one couple words, or, and I would just free write based off of that. And so that always felt to me like a really fun merging of kind of you, like I felt like I was channeling you, Ellis, with like your dance and your writing and your, yeah.
I love that. Yes, because I
Yeah.
think, at least for me, the movement is that unfortunately takes us into a whole nother uh, place, but so much that's inexpressible for us. Um, that I found in graduate school, I would have young women writing these beautiful pieces and they could not speak it. So how do we
Mm,
get that? How do we make that speakable? We breathe, we move. So I love that you were able just intuitively, I'm going to dance, I'm going to feel this music, I'm going to grab a line. It was a great combination there.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, just like how stories live in our body, stuckness lives in our body too, right?
Oh,
Like
yes.
limiting stories live in our bodies too.
Yes. Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been a really lovely conversation. As you said, yeah, I feel like it could even keep spinning off into like all these
No.
other threads, but
Yes,
we'll
yes.
we'll rein it in for today.
Right,
And
right. Yes.
yeah, and so I would love to just kind of, yeah, here to close, kind of give you an opportunity if there's any last pieces that you want to share, or certainly share where people can find you. And I'll also like have, your website and, places they can find you in the show notes for the podcast as well. But yeah, if you want to kind of share, if people were inspired to work with you or to read your work, whatever, however people can kind of tap in, and either support you or learn alongside and with and from you, or yeah.
Oh, thank you, Kate. That is just um, a wonderful privilege to be able to share what I love doing. So I have bewildernesswriting.com, and I can work one-on-one with you, and it does not have to be writing. It can be any creative endeavor or project in the world, and we can put some kind of one little step at a time together, or just join our writing groups. And that is also, all of that is under that website, because I feel we all have a world of stories inside of us,
Mm,
an entire world or universe, whatever the largest you can think of, vehicle. And Bewilderness Writing is one way that you can start getting that up and out of and on the page.
mm, mm.
So yes, thank you so much
Yeah.
for giving me this opportunity and to share this space and time with you.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, I can definitely attest to just the power too. I mean, I think too, the beauty of sort of the group, the group practices is, you then read your work and, not with anybody fixing or commenting or giving feedback,
Right.
because it's not about perfecting it, but being witnessed in your stories is for many people, an incredibly powerful part of the process. So, I love that you have the group aspect and the one-on-one aspect, so people can kind of fit in where they feel like their edge is, and kind
Yeah,
of get the medicine they need.
I hope so. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope so. It's a real
Yeah.
community. It's a safe, intimate space
Mhm.
that you get by never speaking to each other, really, but you're speaking your stories or your truth or wherever your brain went. It could be a rap song, it could be, a science fiction parallel universe place, but we are all in it together, and we learn so much about each other just by our writings.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Any last words or thoughts you feel called to share?
No, no, just
Okay.
gratitude. Thank you for
Beautiful.
allowing me this time to, no one ever asked. No
No.
one ever asked. I had a moment in grad school. I had the great privilege and opportunity to study with our new U.S. Poet Laureate, Ada Limon. And I
Mm.
was in a class with her once, and I was early on in grad school. And she asked, "What are you working on? Ellis, you go first." And I was so taken aback that someone wanted to know no one ever asked that. Who asked that? So flustered, made absolutely no sense whatsoever, and said something ridiculous. But that is a real treat. So thank you.
Mm.
Thank you again.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Well, yeah, it's my honor to ask. And it is, we're inspired, when we ask those questions, we actually find spaces of deeper connection and inspiration,
Yes.
and I know that's something I'm really like yearning for more of in my life right now. And so, yeah, so thank you
Yes.
for saying yes to the ask.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Anytime.
Well, I am going to go ahead, yeah, and we'll close out this podcast episode. And yeah, thank you everyone who is listening for listening. And feel free to review and rate the podcast if you really liked it. That helps a lot with sort of elevating the podcast, with elevating Ellis, with
Yeah.
elevating
Oh,
me. So yeah. And so just take a moment too, as you're sort of finishing listening to the podcast, just take a moment to just feel what's coming up in your body. Integration is such an important piece of everything. You'll hear me say this again and again, like we have an experience and then we need to integrate it. So give yourself some time and space. If any of this conversation stirred up anything in you, to just kind of acknowledge all of that, and to be present with that for yourself. And if you want to share any takeaways or anything that it sparked for you, you want to keep the conversation going, you can feel free to leave me a comment on the anchor.fm platform where this website or this podcast will be hosted, or on Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or you can email me at kate@wildsacredjourney.com. And if you have any comments for Ellis too, like I said, I'll have her contact information in the show notes, or you can get it to me and I'll pass it on to her. So yeah, thank you so much for listening.